class is all about. The search for happiness means a great deal to me. One thing I'm going to share that I don't often talk about, I get reoccurring bouts of hormone-based depression. I don't usually mention it because there's so many people out there that are suffering other things, plenty worse than me. Everyone's got their own cross to bear. But one of my crosses, one of my big ones, is the cloud that keeps coming back. It doesn't last long, it always lifts, but when it's there, I feel desperately unhappy for absolutely no reason at all. Yeah, I see some people nodding out there. Yeah. So how can I possibly be happy during those times when my brain and my body are shouting at me, "You are not happy"? My search for happiness has yielded up some answers. I think a lot of you in here have heard my conversion story before, so I'm not going to tell my standard conversion story. I'm going to glide over the top of it and talk about stuff that happens a little later. Anyway, as a college student, I believed in God and tried to live a holy life, but God was not at the center of my life. Like any spiritual beginner, I was self-absorbed. And I was pretty self-indulgent. Fortunately, my indulgence of choice was none too destructive. I loved reading history. I craved the intellectual stimulation. I wanted to know what people were like in every time and every place. And I loved travel for the same reason. Travel as much as I could. Pretty harmless false gods, all things considered. But any false god is going to turn against you. By the end of grad school, I was lonely, I was internet addicted, and I felt like my life had no real meaning or purpose. I knew I had to stretch myself as a human being and become more than an intellectual high achiever. That's when I read Dante and my conversion to God began. I began seeking God and love. I went home to Arizona, married my best friend, and had a baby. I figured that would stretch me and give my life meaning and purpose, right? No, you can't even put family at the center of your life. That's not a good God either. Things didn't quite go the way I planned. The birth, 10 years ago, January 2007, was a traumatic experience. Things went wrong beginning to end. I could not sleep at night because the birth would replay over and over and over in my head, and I could not forgive the doctors. One Friday morning, 6 months after the birth, I woke up with a thought in my head, I better get to Mass. Kind of an odd thought for a Lutheran to be having on a Friday morning, but I decided to roll with it. At this point in my life, by the way, God had been calling me to be Catholic for a couple of years, calling me to pray to saints for a couple of years, and I've been going, I can't hear you, big time. So, I thought, surely it's safe now. I haven't been in a Catholic church in more than a year. You know, what could happen? So, I looked at Mass times on the internet, went, they do have Mass on Fridays, what do you know? Went to our Mother of Sorrows for the noon Mass, and I showed up, and it turned out it was a healing Mass. Everyone was standing in line to go up and get anointed with oil. And I only vaguely knew what was going on, so I got up and got in line to get anointed too. And baby and I got anointed with oil, and afterwards I went back to my seat and prayed, God, what am I doing here? What's this all about? And the only thing that came to mind was that I should pray to be healed from the birth. And so I prayed for healing. Nothing happened. No voice from above. No angelic singing. No sudden weight lifted off of me. In fact, things just got more awkward because then baby started getting fussy. And then it was communion time. Do I go up or not? I don't know the rules around here. I ended up running out of the church holding my baby. I got so flustered. But anyway, it wasn't a particularly experience for me. But that night, I went home and I could sleep. For the first time in 6 months, I wasn't haunted by the birth. I slept that night, and the next night, and the next night. All of that anger inside of me, it was just gone. And I realized that God had actually healed me. And I went, wow, God. I didn't know you did things like that. I didn't know you wanted to heal me and work in my life like that and change me like that. Thank you so much. I'm still not becoming Catholic. A couple of months later, I was reading a magazine article on hospital errors. Bad idea, just before going to sleep. And I lie awake all night mad at the world all over again. The next night, when it's bedtime, I don't even want to go to bed, and I pray, God, I need your help here. I know you healed me. I know you healed me. Granted, it was silly of me to read that magazine article, but I know you healed me. You let this anger come back. Why did you let it come back? And I heard a big, booming voice, louder and more obvious than I think I've ever heard God speak in my entire life. You're not praying to the saints. And I replied, what? I don't have to pray to saints. Nobody has to pray to saints. Catholics don't even have to pray to saints. It's purely optional. God did not seem impressed by my theology. There was no answer. So I went, I better pray to saints. And I immediately started thinking, who do Catholics pray to? And I went, well, Catholics pray to Mary. So I got up my courage and went, I don't know how to pray the Hail Mary. What do I say? Hi, Mary. And I felt her loving, motherly presence in the room. And I knew, without even having to ask, that I was already healed. And I told her, thank you so much. I'm so sorry I've ignored you up to this point, what with being Lutheran and all. I promise you I will not make that mistake again. What I find so ironic is that it took encountering Mary for me to finally say yes to God. That was my big, behold, I am the handmaid of the Lord, let it be done unto me according to your word moment, where I finally decided that I was going to do what God wanted me to do and stop trying to live life my own way. And God was luring me, you'll notice, with happiness, with the promise of healing, with the promise of getting rid of that anger, even with the promise of more experiences with the saints. I was hooked. I was lured. I went, okay, God, if this is the path of life, I am for it. So I went, I'm going to try your way. And God delivered. God lured me with happiness. God gave me happiness. I started praying to the saints. And at that point in my life, just about every time I said, Saint so-and-so, pray for me, I would feel their presence, or I would hear a reply, or my wallet would be found right there on the table next to me, Something would happen, and I was astonished. God became far more real to me than he ever had before. Then, after that, God started sending saints to kind of take me under their wing. I've always thought of them as my spiritual directors in heaven. And I think back on my spiritual growth by thinking about what saint was teaching me at that point in my life. That's the way I organize thinking about my search for happiness. So here goes. At that point, the saint God gave me was Saint Francis de Sales, who ever so gently suggested that it would be a very good idea if I started giving up my sins. I wasn't so sure about that because I was rather attached to some of them, but the man is a smooth talker. So, for the first time in my life, I embarked on more or less this program of holiness. I'm going to pray every day. I'm going to go to Mass. I'm going to become Catholic. I'm going to serve other people. I'm going to confess my sins. I'm going to start getting rid of my sins. I'm going to start growing in holiness. That began under St. Francis de Sales. I wrote here, Matthew Kelly had a doctor named John to guide him, and I had a doctor of the church named Francis to guide me. But it was pretty much the same program in both cases. Was I happier? Absolutely. I was in fact thrilled that my sins, which I'd always just kind of thought were a permanent part of myself, doomed to follow me around until the day of judgment, when God would finally wipe them away, that they could be gone. They could be toast. They could not only be forgiven now, they could stop happening. I could stop doing them. This was great. I loved this new me. So, my spiritual path continued on much the same lines for several years after that. St. Augustine became the next saint to mentor me. He continued to help me grow closer to God through prayer, spiritual reading, self-denial, do not love the world. He also got me teaching at church, but that's another story. Several years later, to my deep surprise, along comes Joshua from the Old Testament. He taught me a lot about courage and trust in God. He also finally got it through my head that I'd really been trying to learn, but hadn't had much success at, that serving people is a source of happiness. He gave me a large family of religious refugees from Egypt who showed up at my doorstep. Sometimes God is not subtle. The fact that I was becoming a better human being and growing closer to God thrilled me. But about 2 years ago, I gotta say, I noticed my happiness starting to level off. In fact, there were even points where I was starting to burn out. I was doing the right things. I was still on this program. But I didn't feel as happy as I used to. I started to wonder, am I giving up the good fight? Am I becoming lax? What's going on? Is this supposed to happen, or am I doing something wrong? What's going on here? And then, along came my next saint, King David. 1 year ago, it was 2 a.m. and I was wide awake, and I thought, well, it's been a while since I prayed to a saint. I better find a saint to pray to. I prayed to St. Augustine. That ended quickly. Very brief conversation. Prayed to St. Francis Xavier. Nothing. Wasn't talking to me today. I just finished teaching a class that involved David, and so off the top of my head I went, St. David, pray for me. Bam! David shows up. I feel his presence, and more than that, I feel joy being poured through my face as though he's pouring it with a pitcher of light. And I feel the most intense joy. And it lasts about 2 minutes. And then I hear a voice say, anytime you need joy, just ask me. That terrified me. That terrified me for a number of reasons. For one thing, how in the world could I hope in a promise like that? Anytime I need some kind of supernatural ecstatic joy, just say, David, pray for me? Really? Seriously? And also, that meant I had a new spiritual director in heaven. And David? I thought Joshua was a stretch. Now I get David? But I still asked him, okay, I decided to test him. Okay, I'd like some more joy, please. He did it again, another 2 minutes of joy. After that, I said, again? He laughed. Okay, enough is enough. But at that point, I was terrified and started telling him every single reason why it was not a good idea for him to be my next spiritual director in heaven. I started telling him everything that we do not have in common. And I ended with the line, and I've only been married once. Ouch. Not, don't insult David. Just don't insult David. He got angry. He got angry for about 2 seconds. And then he cheerfully said, "Oh, don't worry. You'll learn plenty from me." And then he was gone. I didn't get a wink of sleep the rest of the night. I stayed awake the whole rest of the night going, "Oh no, what did I just get myself into?" How much more time do we have? A few more minutes. Okay. I wondered what in the world God is going to teach me through David. Well, first off, for the next 3 months, everywhere I went, I saw the quote, "Do not judge." Everywhere. I figured, okay, I get it. Yeah, I totally earned that one. And David, I realized, hadn't just forgiven the insult. He had forgiven me extravagantly and started doing all kinds of fun and thoughtful things for me out of nowhere. And I started to realize that there was a whole area of the spiritual life where I had barely scratched the surface. The heart virtues is how I think of them. I call them the heart virtues or the soft virtues. Mercy, compassion, forgiveness, gentleness, generosity, gratitude, rest, praise, cheerfulness. I also noticed a kind of increased loss of control, increased surrender. We took in foster kids. We'd already planned to do that before David showed up, but now here they were. I had to let go of perfectionism. No more perfect family. Instead, a whole lot of messy families and messy lives that I am now somehow called to be a part of. Let go and let God. No more perfect classes planned to a T. Sometimes life intervenes and you just have to show up with blank pieces of paper and ask people to write things down for themselves. I realized just how merciless I had been with myself all these years. I started to give myself permission to be weak and imperfect. When I began to show mercy toward myself, especially on those bad days when everything was screaming at me, "You are not happy," I became much more able to receive mercy from God, to be consoled by Him, and to give mercy to others and console others. And I realized how much God is present in all these trials in our life. I realized we experience God's glory when we use our gifts, when we're able to live for Him, and we're able to do the right thing. We experience God's strength in our weakness. We think there's no way I can keep going. There's no way I can keep doing the right thing. And we experience God's mercy in our failures when we know we've done the wrong thing. And here's God anyway, loving us, holding us, lifting us back up. Nothing can separate us from the love of God. In the highs, in the lows, He's there. And my joy started to come back. That's where I am right now. So, for the next 6 weeks, we're going to do something a little more than this. Matthew Kelly focuses heavily on finding joy through right action, on developing these good habits of prayer, of service. Do these bring joy? Absolutely. But there's more to it. Matthew Kelly touches on it some. We covered chapters 1 through 4 today. Chapter 5 is all about mercy, and it's a long chapter. There's chapters in here on gratitude, on gentleness. Matthew Kelly covers the soft virtues, but he doesn't develop them into a major theme. I would like to develop them into a major theme. I think they deserve more airtime. They are an equal and complementary path to joy. We need both. As I started reading more books on joy to prepare for this class, I realized that most books take one tack or the other. They focus on the action virtues or on the heart virtues. 2 books with yellow covers, both written by survivors of cancer that say that their experiences cause them to reflect on finding joy in trial. This one's got the action virtues. This one's got the heart virtues. We need both of them. bold, virtuous action, and a soft, soft heart. That's what the joy-filled life looks like. That's also what Jesus' life looked like. So I think we're on the right track. In each of the following classes, if you go through Resisting Happiness, and I'm going to throw in some of the material from the other books as well, we're going to examine at least one action virtue and at least one heart virtue. Next week, let's try to read up to chapter 13 if we can. They're short chapters, so I think you can do it. If not, if things get busy, focus especially on chapter 5 on mercy. It's called Life is Messy. Chapter 9 on prayer, that habit of daily prayer. And chapter 13 on praying through the day. We're going to focus especially on developing a habit of prayer and developing a heart of mercy. All right. Sound good? Good. Let's see. Okay. I think class is over. Your homework is to find one area in your life to fight resistance this week. That was one of our exercises earlier. Do you remember what it was? All right, let's close in prayer. Let's pray the prayer on page 177 of this book. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Loving Father, I come to you today to make myself 100% available to you. I lay everything I have and everything I am at your feet. Take what you want to take and give what you want to give. Command me in all things. I will do whatever you ask me to do. Transform me and transform my life so that I may become the very best version of myself and lead others to you with my life and my love. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Thank you.